This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Hong Kong's deadly blaze under control, but still burning after more than 24 hours. The fire has killed at least 55, with hundreds still missing. 3 men are under arrest as a criminal probe begins. Now, China's new arms control white paper pictures Beijing as a global security heavyweight, a defender of the post-war order and a rising force in disarmament and non-proliferation. Taiwan, meantime, begins initial U.S. arms talks under President William Lai's $40 billion defense boost. But the opposition-controlled parliament is pushing back, saying the plan lacks detail. And Tokyo denies a report that President Trump urged Prime Minister Takaichi not to aggravate China amid an escalating row over her remarks on Taiwan. And Chinese industrial profits slipped back into contraction in October, their weakest showing in 5 months, as firms face soft domestic demand and a downturn in exports. Also in the bulletin, South Korea puts more than a dozen satellites into orbit with its 4th rocket launch, a mission it has called a turning point for its domestic space sector. A huge blaze at a Hong Kong residential complex under control after more than 24 hours. Well, firefighters are racing to put out the remaining flames. And you are looking at live pictures from the compound where the fire has killed at least 55 people. Nearly 300 others are missing.
It is very difficult for us, and the area of the fire ground or the domestic unit is not big, so we need to deploy a limited or optimize our manpower to perform our firefighting and rescue operation. In short, we are trying our best, and we will not give up any chance to pick up to save life.
Well, the inferno tore through 7 of the 8 high-rise blocks of the complex known as Wang Fuk Court, located in Tai Po district. Now, the tightly packed compound has 2,000 apartments and is home to more than 4,600 people. Families are camping near the site for news of their loved ones.
熄晒啲火先可以救翻我哋嗰座，而家我哋嗰座最尾仲燒緊㗎。冇水。而家佢同佢爸爸兩個都未出嚟，同埋我哋樓上樓下我都見到個師奶，佢老公已經走咗啦。冇見到佢，我都好心痛了啊！緊要救人哋。
Well, investigations are underway to determine the cause. Police say they found non-compliant materials, including foam used to seal windows, along with bamboo scaffolding and green mesh that has been put up for renovation works. 3 men have been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. Well, meantime, shares of China Taiping Insurance fell on concerns over the insurer's estimated 334 million Hong Kong dollar exposure to the residential project at the center of a deadly fire. They tanked as much as 8% in early trading before paring losses to close about 2% in the red. Well, the insurer underwrote third-party liability and employee compensation for mandatory building and window inspection work at Wang Fuk Court in Tai Po. Well, CNA's Deborah Wong joins us live now from Hong Kong. Deborah, tell us what are some of the latest updates from authorities on their investigations into the blaze?
So Hong Kong's anti-corruption body, ICAC, has launched an investigation into the construction company. And we heard that, they've actually gone to the construction company's office and see some documents. And this also came after authorities at 6 a.m. this morning briefed the media saying that, the construction company, the company behind the renovation was grossly negligent. And, they cited issues such as using non-compliant materials, such as the protective netting around the exterior of the building, down to styrofoam boxes that's plastered onto the wall, as well as some plastic sheeting. So all these, are some ideas of what we can, sort of get as to how the investigation would carry on. Now, it's still quite unclear at this point exactly what part of the corruption investigation will sort of, unravel, what this really pertains to. But there have been a lot of resentment from residents as far back as last year when this renovation project was first launched over the very hefty price tag. We're looking at about 330 million Hong Kong dollars for this renovation project, and residents actually had to shell up about 180,000 Hong Kong dollars per unit. And just for context, this residential building is home to a huge proportion of elderly residents above the age of 65 years old, and this is also a subsidized government project. So there has been a lot of unhappiness regarding the hefty price tag they've had to pay, and of course, this will be taken into consideration when authorities do the investigation.
And Deborah, not to mention that a number of people have been affected by the fire, and I'm curious to know what kind of support is being given to them.
Absolutely. There have been, an outpouring amount of support. I just want to show you what I can see in front of me. Right here, you see a huge sea of people, and these are volunteers, giving out boxes of food rations, giving out masks, giving out portable chargers. And earlier in the day, I was doing a couple of live reports just in a shirt and pants, but right now I have my jacket on. That's because temperatures are dropping in Hong Kong. It's about 18 to 17 degrees Celsius right now. It could get even colder. And so what you can see over there are people actually handing out warm blankets, thick jackets as well. And, residents, of course, they are quite distraught, and, we've been trying to talk to them, but they understandably are declining interviews at this point. But we did speak to some people who say that they have camped here overnight. They don't want to be in the shelters. They want to sit here at the deck where they can actually look at the building burning before their eyes, because I think they're still trying to come to terms as to what the future is going to look like, because for most of them, this is their retirement home. And, right now they're still trying to come to terms with that. So there has been mental health support as well. There's a WhatsApp group startup to sort of reach out to residents who require that. And I also did speak to Red Cross earlier, and they did tell me that aside from the relief, the food rations, activating people to try to talk to residents, try to get them to, help them figure out what the next steps going to be. They are also offering counseling sessions. So we are seeing, aside from humanitarian efforts here, a lot of companies coming forward, donating huge sums of money. We're talking about Trip.com, Red Cross China as well. I'm also getting some information that Lenovo has also stepped in to donate quite a substantial amount of money. So all these really is community spirit at its best.
Well, it's really heartening to see the community coming together to aid those in need. Thanks so very much for that report, CNA's Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. Right, for more insights into the fire, let's bring in Professor Guan Yu from UNSW Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. Well, thanks so very much, Professor, for joining us today. Let's just start with the speed of this blaze. Now, we've heard multiple versions of what started the fire, but what's also important here is why did it spread so fast? Your thoughts on that, Professor?
My thoughts when I observe the fire spread is a combination of three flammable materials: the bamboo scaffolding, the styrofoam, and the green mesh, which are basically made out of polymers. So you don't need a lot to start these materials to burn. And once they begin to burn, they will spread very rigorously.
And some residents have pointed out that, they've seen workers smoking on site for months. But how realistic, though, is it that cigarettes could actually trigger a blaze at this scale, and the extra conditions? What are some of those extra conditions that would have to line up?
I would, in my opinion, a cigarette would not be the only source of ignition. Okay, it can either be naturally occurrence, for example, a short circuit in the electrical board, or even some burst of the gas pipes, could be one of the possible causes. But of course, your suggestion that it could be even man-made, we can't rule that out as well, because there could be workers that are working there, and they could have inadvertently, started the fire, and it started from a small fire and started to engulf to a big fire, at the end.
Yeah, so let's also talk about how these systems are actually tested. I mean, do current fire tests for scaffolding, netting, does it come anywhere close to real-life conditions? Because we're talking about wind, debris, and perhaps aging coatings, perhaps what we saw in Taipo.
Right. I can share the standards that we have in Australia, right? In Australia, we have the AS5113, which actually look at a facade of around 10 meters tall, and we effectively have a fire right at the bottom to actually test the facade. So this is one of the rigorous tests that we always carry out in Australia. But I'm not sure whether in Hong Kong or in your jurisdiction, you do have this standard to test this type of facade or even scaffolding. So
Right.
I know there are other international test standards that even carried out that testing. So I know this is something that we should look at,
Right.
from Hong Kong perspective.
So as investigators move in, they're going to be looking for answers in the debris. And as an engineer, what would you want the investigators to test or sample from the site to understand whether the materials, are actually performed as specified?
So, okay. It is not surprising that if you have styrofoams that are non-compliant, it is going to burn, because styrofoam will start to melt at around 180 degrees C, and it will drip, and those are the cause of the fuel that they will burn. The green netting is a very interesting part of the scaffolding. So, but in my experience, those are made out of polymers as well. So whether it is compliant to protect the building or shield the building, it is something that needs to be investigated. But definitely for bamboo scaffolding, I do realize that this is an iconic structure that has been used in Hong Kong for years and years. Perhaps it's about time we test the flammability of the bamboo itself to see how flammable they are. And if they are flammable, then they should be considered to be phased out in future constructions.
Right. And finally, let's look ahead rather than back. If, Professor, say you were advising Hong Kong or any of these dense Asian city today, what are the, one or two most important engineering changes you would make to prevent another tragedy like Taipo?
So for external structures like the bamboo scaffolding, in Australia, we tend to use metal scaffolding. So that will eliminate the fire risk immediately. And that will be one of the change, to actually, for the regulators to think about that, okay? And the second thing is looking at the building developers and those people actually involved in the construction to actually ensure that fire safety is paramount in all the things they do, okay? These people, they should not look at just cutting corners, but really try to enforce the strict regulations to ensure the safety of the residents.
Well, thanks for sharing with us what needs to change so that this tragedy doesn't happen again. Professor Guan Yu from UNSW Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. Well, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, troubles are mounting for China's state-backed developer Wanke, with reports that at least 2 banks have rejected its recent loan requests. Plus, Toyota Motors' October output accelerating with strong US demand, fueling growth. Hello again. You are just in time for Business News with Roland Lim, who's here to talk to us about China's industrial sector. And apparently things are tentative in spite of some challenges.
Yes, absolutely. The latest figures paint an interesting picture for the sector's trajectory in 2025. Now, for the first 10 months of the year, profits are higher as compared to last year. But China's factories slipped back into contraction in the month of October after double-digit growth in the previous 2 months. This as businesses grappled with lackluster domestic demand and an export downturn. Industrial profits fell 5.5% from a year earlier, the biggest decline since June, and a stark reversal from the more than 20% growth in August and in September. For the first 10 months of the year, however, profits edged up around 2%. The reading came in weaker than expected, underscoring persistent domestic headwinds for the world's second largest economy. This as even trade tensions with the US ease. Overall growth momentum has slowed sharply, with third quarter expansion slipping to its weakest pace in a year. Official figures earlier this month also showed disappointing October retail sales, despite an 8-day national holiday and the kickoff of the Singles' Day shopping season. At the same time, high youth unemployment and a prolonged property slump continue to weigh on consumer and business confidence. Chinese leaders have indicated a stronger push to boost consumption over the next 5 years, but have yet to roll out any new major stimulus. China and Hong Kong stocks closed flat on the weak industrial data. Shanghai Composite closing up higher by 0.29%. Shenzhen the other way, down 0.25%. And Hang Seng Index flat at 2,594 points. Property developer Wanke's liquidity concerns also weighing on investor sentiment. Waning support for one of China's last big property developers trying to fend off a default. China Wanke is said to have been rejected by at least 2 big local banks as it tried to secure a short-term loan. According to Bloomberg report, Wanke held talks with banks about securing a so-called liquidity loan in order to help repay 2 bonds worth a combined $805 million due next month. The talks were held ahead of an announcement yesterday evening that Wanke would seek bondholder approval to push back on the maturity of one of its bonds. Its bonds plunged following its plan to get an extension, sparking speculation that the company might face a debt restructuring. Experts say a restructuring by Wanke could have an even bigger impact on sentiment in an already fragile market than defaults by privately owned peers Evergrande and Country Garden. Wanke's Hong Kong listed shares dropped as much as 8.5%, hitting a record low before trimming some of those losses. It ended the day nearly 8% in the red. Other mainland property developers also closing lower. Policymakers in China are trying a new tactic to get households to spend more. They've introduced school breaks in autumn in a bid to boost holiday spending. At least 30 cities have introduced them, and the move is seen as early payoff, but not everyone is on board. The plan announced in September is part of broader measures to boost services consumption. So far, the results seem promising, with hotel booking rates nearly doubling in Sichuan from the same period last year. Estimates show that if the policy is adopted throughout China, it could add some $50 billion to annual consumption. But some parents have criticized the rollout of the holiday break, saying that they have limited amount of leave and are unable to take off to accompany their children. And with schools closed, our parents have to make childcare arrangements or excursions, which could run into the thousands of yuan. Top Chinese firms are reportedly training their artificial intelligence models overseas to access NVIDIA chips and to bypass US curbs on advanced technology. The Financial Times reports that Alibaba and ByteDance are among the tech giants training their latest large language models in data centers across Southeast Asia. Citing sources, the report says Offshore training has risen steadily since Washington moved in April to restrict sales of NVIDIA's H20 chips. It adds that Chinese companies are relying on leased facilities owned and operated by non-Chinese entities. DeepSeek is said to be an exception. The firm had stockpiled NVIDIA chips before the US export bans and is training its models domestically. Now, DeepSeek is also working with local chip makers led by Huawei to optimize and to develop next-generation Chinese AI chips. The companies named in the report have not responded to the claims. Meantime, the Bank of Korea has left key interest rate unchanged as expected amid a volatile currency and overheated housing market. The South Korean Central Bank Board voted to hold the lending rate 2.5% for a fourth straight month in order to bolster financial stability. Alongside its rate decision, the BOK presented an upbeat outlook on the economy. Now, it raises this year's growth forecast to 1% and upgraded next year's projection to 1.8%. And that's mainly due to strong exports and a steady recovery in private consumption. Inflation projection for next year also revised up to 2.1%. The Korean won continues to tumble. It is currently stronger against the greenback by 0.68%, 1,461.37 to the dollar. But it's giving little room for the BOK to further ease policy. South Korean officials earlier warned of a stern response to excessive volatility in the forex markets and speculative trading. Benchmark Kospi index in Seoul ending the day 0.2% higher. Investors are also watching potential steps by the government to cool persistent price gains in Seoul's housing market. Analysts now expect the central bank to push back its next rate cut to January as the BOK raised both growth and inflation forecasts for this year. German sportswear maker Puma pouncing as much as 14% in Frankfurt after reports of a potential takeover bid by China's Anta Sports. Bloomberg reports that other companies could potentially be casting their hats into the ring, including Li Ning as well as Japan's ASICS. Shares of Puma have tumbled more than 60% so far this year amid sluggish interest from consumers in an increasingly competitive sportswear market. The sports apparel maker also announced plans to cut some 900 jobs last month and to focus on running, football, and training equipment. Shares of Labubu maker Mart leading a rally in China's consumer stocks today after Beijing announced plans to boost domestic consumption. Now, other stocks gaining include jewelry maker Labubu Gold as well as cosmetics brand Mauke Ping. Mart's rally today is welcome relief for the toy maker, which has seen its shares drop by almost 40% from an all-time high in August. Mart's meteoric rise on the back of the Labubu craze is starting to show signs of sputtering growth. As analysts say, the hype over the monster dolls may soon reach its peak, drawing parallels with the Beanie Babies bust in the 90s. Toyota says its global production rose for a fifth straight month in October, boosted by strong U.S. demand and offsetting weaker Japan and China sales. Global output rose 4% on year, sales rising 2%, marking 10 straight months of growth. Production led by growth in the U.S. was up 26%. It's the fifth straight month of double-digit growth for the Japanese automaker on the back of robust demand for its hybrid vehicles, as well as a recovery from last year's production stoppages. Meantime, sales in China slumping by 7% after some regions ended a subsidy program. Shares of Toyota closing out the day 0.1% lower, 3,138 yen. And that's the latest in business.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, a study finds that the U.S. is the largest recipient of Chinese loans, despite warning other nations about the dangers of doing so. Plus, Japan rejects a report saying U.S. President Donald Trump advised Prime Minister Takaichi not to aggravate China. Hello there, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Hong Kong's deadly blaze under control, but still burning after more than 24 hours. The fire has killed at least 55, with hundreds still missing. 3 men are under arrest as a criminal probe begins. China's new arms control white paper pictures Beijing as a global security heavyweight, a defender of the post-war order, and a rising force in disarmament and non-proliferation. Taiwan begins initial U.S. arms talks under President William Lai's $40 billion defense boost, but the opposition-controlled parliament is pushing back, saying the plan lacks detail. China has released its latest white paper, laying out measures to implement global security while positioning itself as a builder of world peace. Well, the document highlights China's role in international arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, and clarified Beijing's position on security governance in fields like space, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. Well, the paper also emphasized Chinese commitment to work with peace-loving countries to improve global security governance and advance the multilateral arms control process. Well, China has called for the United Nations to play a pivotal role in fostering a global governance framework. The release of the white paper on arms control comes 2 months after China put its military prowess on full display. A Victory Day parade held in Beijing in September showcased a range of new weapons in front of more than 20 foreign heads of state, including Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Taiwan has held preliminary discussions with the U.S. on arms purchases as part of the island's $40 billion supplementary defense budget that was proposed just yesterday by President William Lai. Well, Mr. Lai said that the ultimate aim was to establish defense proficiency against a potential Chinese invasion, with no room for compromise. Defense Minister Wellington Koo said that weapons purchases from the U.S. naturally constitute a significant part of the island's spending plans. Washington is Taipei's most important international backer and arms supplier, despite the lack of formal diplomatic ties. Now, the supplementary defense budget, though, will need to be passed by Taiwan's opposition-dominated parliament. Opposition Kuomintang lawmakers have criticized President Lai's proposal. One KMT member said that the sum for the budget could only be secured through debt financing, adding that President Lai's ruling Democratic Progressive Party had provided little details on how the money would be spent. A U.S. research institution study has found out that America is actually the largest recipient of Chinese loans globally, despite warning other economies of the dangers of taking such financing. Well, the report from Aid Data Research Lab says that it is part of a broader shift in China's lending portfolio away from developing nations and into high-income countries. Tony Waterman files this report for CNA from Washington.
LNG projects in Texas and Louisiana. Data centers in Northern Virginia, new terminals at New York's JFK Airport and Los Angeles International Airport. These are just some of the critical infrastructure projects bankrolled by Chinese state-owned entities. In a new bombshell report, researchers at Aid Data also found that Beijing helped Chinese firms acquire or buy stakes in high-tech U.S. firms and provided liquidity for a wide array of Fortune 500 companies, including Amazon, Verizon, Tesla, Boeing, Qualcomm, and Halliburton.
We're talking about lending into very sensitive sectors that have been designated as sensitive on national security grounds. So things like AI, defense production, quantum computing, biotechnology, robotics, semiconductors.
Brad Parks is the executive director of Aid Data. He says Chinese state lenders avoided scrutiny by routing money through offshore shell companies in places like Bermuda or running the money through an international bank syndicate. And it's not just the U.S. The report finds that China bankrolled nearly 10,000 projects and activities in high-income countries between 2000 and 2023, totaling nearly $1 trillion.
I think everyone previously assumed that China's lending operations in wealthy industrialized countries were small and insignificant, but we discovered the opposite to be true. The share of Beijing's lending portfolio that supports high-income and upper-middle-income countries, it has just skyrocketed from 12% to 76%.
Data's research shows that shift accelerated a decade ago after Beijing introduced Made in China 2025, a strategic plan to transform the country into a self-sufficient, high-tech manufacturing powerhouse, prioritizing key sectors like semiconductors, biotech, and quantum computing.
Their efforts failed.
William Hennigan is a former White House investment advisor. He says the acquisitions present three main risks: collection of sensitive intelligence, control over critical infrastructure, and an unfair competitive advantage in China's favor.
I think, frankly, the most important type of risk is at a certain point, economic competitiveness and security risk is going to ultimately determine the long-run trajectory and success of one nation versus the other. And when two nuclear powers are competing with one another, conflict is going to play out in the field of economics or technology, not necessarily on the battlefield.
Hennigan says Western governments have traditionally lacked the deep financial expertise needed to catch this kind of statecraft. But he says screening in the U.S. has gotten better in the last decade.
If there's a counterbalance to the alarms that this report sets off, it's this. Data says that many of China's lending operations here in the United States were guided by the pursuit of profit, rather than geopolitical or geoeconomic advantages. For CNA, I'm Tony Waterman in Washington, D.C.
Well, to help us unpack all that data, let's speak with Alejandro Reyes, who joins us from Hong Kong. He's a professor at the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Just before we get into the findings, I want to talk about aid data itself. How reliable is it as an independent tracker of China's overseas finance?
No, I think, thank you very much. Happy to join you. I think aid data is widely seen as, a very credible independent source tracking China's overseas finance. It uses recipient country records, corporate filings, and project documents, not Chinese self-reporting. It covers, 33,000 plus projects, I think, across 217 countries or economies. So quite an unmatched scope and methodological rigor. So I think it's a fairly reliable source.
Okay, so now once we accept that data, there is a big contradiction staring at us in the face, right? With the U.S. deeply tied into Chinese credit, even though Washington is warning others about the risks. So with this paradox now, what challenge does that pose for U.S. allies as well as the global financial order?
Well, I think it was alluded to in your report that there's always, nowadays, we live in an age of, the term is economic security is a priority. And what does that actually mean? So, if Chinese financing is coming into these economies, including the United States, it can create dependencies in sensitive sectors. It can potentially create perceived security risks, particularly with regard to sort of infrastructure. If you're looking at ports, power grids, telecoms, digital structures, I mean, these might be seen as a strategic infrastructure that if there were some kind of foreign, it doesn't have to be China, but foreign connection or control of these strategic infrastructure, that there is then, of course, a strategic risk that comes with that. So, it's not necessarily the case that, China is doing something nefarious. From the Chinese perspective, China's just becoming a huge overseas investor, like any country that's accumulated these funds and wants to get a good return. So, it's this shift over 10 years, as noted in your report. It signals a new strategic phase that
high-income markets offer lower financial risk and higher strategic payoff. So China may gain access to advanced technology, data infrastructure, energy systems, and major corporates, and indeed can become a tool of influence. But this is China behaving like an economy that's looking out to invest and gain a good return.
Professor, just to push that point a little further, does that now mean that China is gaining more influence, into U.S. regulators' offices, into their boardrooms, especially over the tech sectors and these critical infrastructure sectors you've mentioned, rather than over the traditional Belt and Road borrowers that we've seen?
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about Belt and Road, you're talking more about China investing in developing economies. You're talking more about sort of traditional ODA, overseas development assistance, or investment that is tied to development financing, all of those things that sort of we traditionally think as assistance, aid, or lending for development. But here you're talking about something completely different. This is, I mean, while it might come under this data set that the aid data has accumulated, it's not really aid. I don't, it shouldn't really be considered aid. But it comes under this. The data is accumulated because we're talking about state-supported outward investment, industrial technological partnership financing, commercial credit flows. So that's why it's in this data set. But yes, I mean, I think it's it then behooves the host country, and I think we've seen this in the United States, certainly in Trump 1.0 administration, Biden administration, a greater need by the United States.
Professor, I mean, part of what makes this so hard to track, I want to highlight, is the way the money moves, right? I mean, the report highlights that these Chinese state banks, they are routing money through Bermuda, Cayman Shells, and through all these big international bank syndicates. What do you think is the most worrying part of that bit to you?
Well, I mean, there's that case that created some controversy a few years ago, where this insurer, Right USA, that had a lot of CIA employees in their roles, and a Chinese company purchased this company. And now that was spotted, and then the purchase was reversed. But therein lies the issue: is can a country like the United States and any other country that is worried about its economic security, does it have the infrastructure and the capacity to screen these investments, given whatever strategic goals and security goals and concerns it has? I would say that the United States certainly would have the capacity, but it still has to sort of ramp that up. But certainly for many other countries, if you have, and again, it's not necessarily about China, but if you have a country that you might consider to be an adversary, or a country that might want to take control of critical infrastructure or a critical sector, then you'll have to ramp up your screening processes.
Right, many thanks for your insights there. Really appreciate your time and thoughts. Alejandro Reyes from Hong Kong, a professor at the University of Hong Kong. Now, Japan says there is, quote, no such fact when asked about a Wall Street Journal report that said U.S. President Donald Trump advised Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi not to provoke China on Taiwan. A chief cabinet secretary, Minoru Kihara, made the comments during a regular press briefing and says the government has made an inquiry to the paper. The Wall Street Journal basically said that Mr. Trump gave the advice to Ms. Takaichi during their call on Tuesday. The exchange took place after Mr. Trump called Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, the row between China and Japan started after the Japanese leader suggested that Tokyo could intervene if Taiwan is attacked. But China is maintaining its demand for Ms. Takaichi to take back her remarks. The Chinese Defense Ministry warns today that Japan will, quote, pay a painful price if it steps out of line over Taiwan. Ms. Takaichi has refused to retract her comments on Taiwan, saying that they are consistent with Japan's long-standing cross-strait policy. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea crackdowns on scams, imposing its first sanctions on individuals and entities for their involvement in transnational crimes in Southeast Asia. Plus, organizers of this robotics competition believe they have the key to developing the next generation of STEM talents. Eleven people have died after a train ran into a group of railway workers in China's southwestern province of Yunnan, making it the deadliest rail incident in more than a decade. 2 others are injured. Now, the train was testing earthquake detection equipment when the collision happened at a curved section of the track at Kunming City's Luoyang Town railway station. Operations at the station have resumed. An investigation into the cause of the collision is underway. Industrial accidents are relatively common in China due to vague regulations and lax safety standards. China's rail network is the world's largest and spans more than 160,000 kilometers. South Korea is imposing sanctions on 15 individuals and 132 entities, including Cambodia's Prince Group, as it ramps up its fight against online scams, targeting its nationals across Southeast Asia. The government says it's the country's first unilateral sanction against a transnational crime. Prince Group is being accused of running large-scale scam centers using trafficked workers to defraud victims worldwide, and was already sanctioned last month by Britain and the United States. Seoul recently agreed to deepen cooperation with Cambodia as online scams surge across Southeast Asia. With that collaboration also taking shape on the ground, the National Intelligence Service and local authorities have arrested 17 South Koreans tied to a scam ring in Sihanoukville. It marks the NIS's first major operation since launching a Korean desk unit earlier this month. The criminal organization is accused of running no-show fraud schemes, posing as public officials to place fake orders with Korean businesses, then coercing them to buy overpriced supplies from sham companies. Since May, they are believed to have extorted $2.4 million from 15,000 merchants. Well, South Korea has also launched its largest satellite yet on its homegrown Nuri rocket. The spacecraft lifted off from the Naro Space Center shortly after 1 a.m. local time.
4, 3, 2, 엔진 점화.
Officials declared the launch a success. They said that the rocket placed a research satellite and a dozen microsatellites into their target orbit, about 600 kilometers above Earth. South Korea's science minister called the launch a turning point for the country's space industry. This was the first mission led by a private company. South Korea-based Hanwha Aerospace assembled the Nuri rocket under a technology transfer from the National Space Agency. This was also the rocket's 4th launch. Further missions are planned in 2026 and 2027, with the country looking to advance its space exploration capabilities. Well, with the world's attention on the global tech race, either in space or in artificial intelligence, what does it take to develop the next generation of STEM talents? Well, organizers at the World Robot Olympiad said that the answer is simple. Start young. CNA's Grace Shin has more from this year's competition in Singapore.
When it comes to getting children interested in science and engineering, the earlier, the better. Studies show among adults exposed to STEM in early childhood, more than half end up in related jobs. That's the idea behind the World Robot Olympiad. Since 2004, the WRO has given children as young as 8 and teens up to 19 a way to test their passion for robotics. The average participant is 13, a deliberate sweet spot.
If you don't catch them at that age, it's a lost case. You really need to get them inspired at that age, and then they take a direction in education, or that's related to this.
But the Secretary General says it takes more than just competition. He suggests that robotics can be a practical application of two different subjects taught in schools.
Many school systems are, stuck in teaching physics, stuck in teaching math as separate disciplines. And I think students will get a lot better understanding of these things if they do robotics, because it's hands-on, it's minds-on, and you get much more involved, and it's a lot more, if you have a competition aspect, a lot more motivation also for lots of people.
One team that's already making that shift, Malaysia.
Our government is very passionate about pushing robotics, STEM into kids, which is what every country should do and what every country is working forward.
Last year, more than half of upper secondary students in Malaysia were enrolled in STEM streams. Another access issue, gender. Even at this year's Olympiad, boys far outnumbered girls. And the imbalance is global. Recent industry data shows women make up just 26% of the global robotics workforce and only about 15% of robotics engineers. Still, this all-girls team from the U.S. says the WRO helped them find other girls who share their interest.
It feels amazing, to be honest, because it lets me know that, even though this is a male-dominated field, us women too can do great things, shown by Bonnie and Bella when they won second place in Panama. And it just feels really great because it sets an example for other females that they can be involved in this too, and that we can be involved in the future.
Many of the finalists here are not first-timers. They're back for their second or even third time, and that's what the WRO aims to build, a pipeline, a community, and a launch pad where first-timers become mentors and students become engineers.
Like Shayan, who first competed at the 2019 WRO in Pakistan. Now he's back as a judge.
Part of me is here in a way to feel better about myself, that I'm doing the kids a favor by making sure the competition is fair, everyone gets a proper chance.
That's where the WRO has an edge. Unlike high-end robotics leagues that cost thousands per team, participants here can start with kits priced from a few hundred to about $1,000, and they can even reuse them. That affordability helped many teams like Lebanon enter a field that often feels out of reach for students in developing countries.
Also, our country should make this pass cheap and help us buy this stuff. If the school want to buy the robotics kits and everything for the kits, very expensive for the schools.
Well, I want robotics to be more acknowledged in school, because mostly it's just one session per week or something. Not a lot of people care about robotics, and I see that as a future. It is the future of life.
But to build that future, more schools need to commit, more funding needs to move, and more children need to see robotics as something bigger than a game. Grace Shin, CNA, Singapore.
And on that note, we wrap up Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.